بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. We express our praise and gratitude to Allah Ta'ala. We seek blessings on the Prophet, peace be upon him. I was supposed to bring you some of the qualities and virtues of Ayatul Kursi, but I haven't even gotten around to even looking at that, so I'll have to bring that back for a different session. Ayah 256. La ikraha fit din. Another one of those ayahs that's so frequently quoted. La ikraha fit din. There is no forcing in deen, or no compulsion of disliked behavior in deen, meaning you can't make someone do something they don't want to do. So we'll explore that. قَدْ تَبَيَّنَ الرُّشْدُ مِنَ الْغَيِّ. So the right has been made clear from the wrong. فَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ. So whoever rejects طاغوت, we'll hold on to that word, وَيُؤْمِن بِاللَّهِ, and believes in Allah, فَقَدْ اسْتَمْسَكَ بِالْعُرْوَةِ الْوُثْقَى. Then they have held on to something, or they are holding on to a tight handhold. لَا انْفِصَامَ لَهَا, which has no break, no split in it. وَاللَّهُ السَّمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ, and Allah is listening, all-knowing. Alright, so لَا إِكْرَاهَ فِي الدِّينِ. There is no compulsion in religion. The mistake that people make when reading this is to understand that no one can ever make you do anything. Obviously, a parent can definitely compel their kid to do all kinds of deen-related matters. And I think we've talked before about what there seems to be consensus on that a government can impose, a Muslim government can impose on its Muslim people. Anybody remember what those two things are?
Wait, two things that what?
That suppose you have this hypothetical Muslim state. What can the Muslim state impose upon its Muslims?
Zakat?
Zakat is one. Meaning it can literally take zakat. That's literally the language in the text. What's the other one?
Zakat and salah.
Salah. You can force people to pray.
How do you do that?
Vipping.
What did you say?
Vipping.
Yeah, exactly.
Literally.
Yeah.
Are
That's
you
what
serious?
some of the schools speak along those lines. You beat them until they start praying. Yeah. What do you guys think about that? Forcing people to do the prayer.
I guess they can go through the motions, but that's so spiritual. Like, I guess somebody can force you to.
Well, I know in Saudi, all businesses have to be closed during prayer time. It's one way.
Did you guys ever pray next to a Saudi before? It's the weirdest thing.
Next to a Saudi?
Like here somewhere. So be praying, and it's hard to concentrate because the Saudi's like. Like literally, that's what it's like.
Really?
Yeah.
Pure mechanical.
Because this literally happened 3 days ago. I was praying, and this dude kept doing all these motions, and in my mind, trying to focus on my prayer, I was like, "Oh, he's Saudi." Let me close my eye. Yeah. So, what do you think about that? Forcing people to pray. If people are forced to pray, then they're going to go through the motions. What would be the benefit?
I feel like they'll,
Where's his voice? Oh, yeah.
at least they're, maybe like since they're so used to praying, that they'll continue praying, and then maybe somewhere down the line they'll get wushu. I think it's, I was just thinking, because for parents, just imposing that on their children. As children, I know I didn't really, really...
Listen to your parents.
Yeah, I was just kind of praying. I didn't really understand it. But now, as I grew up, I can never, it's hard to miss a prayer. I'm so used to that praying because my mom instilled it in me. But now, obviously, I understand it a lot better.
So you're saying your folks made you pray, and that was the right choice. Your thoughts?
It establishes a routine in society, like a schedule.
I think it's interesting in all of because this is at a time, the Quran is revealed at a time when political Islam is very important too. So instead of saying it can draft people for armies and stuff like that. I think it's interesting that these are the two things that you can really like, you know, like tell a person that they have to do it as an Islamic State point. So it's not even like, you know, it's not even, oh, you have to like, if we recruit you for an army, you have to be in that army, or it's not like if we recruit you for whatever other service to the state, it's like you have to pray. So it's I mean, it's just obviously like the importance of what like Islam stands on. It's like a person's connection with Allah versus anything else. Because like, I mean, with Catholicism, it's like you have to like what, give your tithe and like all this stuff. There's like a lot of other random stuff, I think, but
Not random for them, but yeah.
but yeah, I mean, just like stuff that establishes like the political hierarchy of like the Pope and of the whatever papacy and all that stuff versus like, hey, like we need you to pray, we need you to be in the pews and praying. Like that's interesting.
Any your thoughts?
I mean, I think there's two aspects of it, right? Like, the actual motion of going through the harakat and praying is an obligation. So they're fulfilling an obligation, but they're really not benefiting from the prayer, and that's their loss.
I think they are benefiting in the fact that they're doing it.
It's not an internal benefit.
Yeah,
They're
it's
not getting
not.
an internal benefit from it, but they're fulfilling an obligation.
Yeah, but I don't disagree with the fact that you're allowed to do that. It's not what you're getting at, kind of.
So yeah, so there's no compulsion. Religion means you can't make somebody be a Muslim. But if they sign on to being a Muslim, then they're also potentially signing on to other things. Right. So the right course has become clear from the wrong, and whoever holds on, whoever rejects Taghut. Taghut is this idea of just a life of rebellion. Tughyan, Taghut, essentially it's rebellion. Transgression. Like when you see transgression, these translations, I don't think I've seen transgression except like in scripture. But it means you're crossing boundaries. If you reject that life and you turn to Allah, so meaning if you can bring yourself to the point where you've decided, I'm not sinning anymore, okay, then you have joined a handhold that can't be broken. Now the point is that I might slip off, but Allah does not let go. See what we're saying? But
It's really cool.
you were thinking something funny just now.
Huh? No.
Big grin.
Very nice.
Awkward moment.
I think our whole family, like whatever we're thinking, is like straight on her face. Like, hey, this is a nice thought. Big smile.
Mashallah, I'm so happy now. Yeah.
Gives hope to the believers.
Yeah. So yeah, whoever rejects Taghut, believes in Allah, has grasped a most trustworthy handhold with no break, that will not ever break. So for lack of a better way to describe it, Allah Ta'ala will be your rock. Making it further, Allahu waliyul ladhina amanu. Allah is the wali of those who believe. يُخْرِجُونَ مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ. So he takes people out of darkness into light. Out of darknesses into light. This is a small subtle point. Dhulumat is plural. Nur is singular. What's plural of nur? Anwar. So he takes them out of the darknesses into the light. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَوْلِيَاؤُهُمُ الطَّاغُوتُ. So those people who reject, their wali is the life of rebellion.
This translation says false deities. Is that inappropriate?
So false deities would be most appropriate for that time.
For which time?
Time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. I mean, Taghut is basically, think of it as like the force of evil, the force of disbelief, force of rebellion.
Where does that come from?
Tughyan.
Like, what's the triliteral word?
Taghaya, Tagha'a.
It means those who transgress.
Yeah, along those lines.
To
Those
transgress.
are cross boundaries that should not be crossed. So, they are taken out of light into the darknesses. Ula'ika ashabun nar. They are the people of fire, hum fiha khalidun. They will be there forever. So this is coming after Ayatul Kursi. And so now, remember, we said around Ayat 212, we said, okay, that's all basically, Islam has been completed. We've covered everything of Islam. Now the rest of this surah is addressing some social matters, filling in some blanks. And this is sort of the highlight of the whole thing. That all comes down to my relationship with Allah. That's basically it. That is my priority, which I think by now we've all understood and heard a trillion times. And so if I hold on to Allah, Allah will not let me go. He is my wali. He's the one I can rely upon. Especially against people who are rejecting him. So, now we get into debates. Alam tara. So, literal translation of alam tara is, did you not see? The metaphorical meaning is, have you not thought about the following? Alam tara ila alladhi haja Ibrahima fi rabbihi. The person who argued with Ibrahim about his Rabb. So this is Nimrod. So Namrud, is considered to be one of the few people who literally had kingship over the entire world. Take that for whatever it means to you. Like literally the whole world was under his reign. There's 4 people in these tafsirs, I forgot the other 3, who are said to have the entire world under their reign. I think Suleiman was another one of them. So Ibrahim alayhi salam started traveling around debating, or doing da'wah, and in some cases he's debating with people. Here he makes it to the court of the king, and he's debating the king. So have you not considered the one who argued with Ibrahim about his Rabb? An atahu Allahu al-mulka. And Allah Ta'ala is the one who gave him the kingship. Okay. إِذْ قَالَ Ibrahim. So when Ibrahim said, Rabbi alladhi yuhyi wa yumit. So Ibrahim alayhi salam says, my Rabb is the one who gives life and gives death. Okay. So the king says, قَالَ أَنَا أُحْيِي وَأُمِيتُ. I'm the one who gives life and he gives death. Okay. So what did he do? He had 2 prisoners brought in. This person he allowed to go free, and the other person he had executed. It's like, bam, I got it too. Right? And Ibrahim alayhi salam says, so قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْتِي بِالشَّمْسِ مِنَ الْمَشْرِقِ. So he says, so Allah is the one who brings the sun from the east. فَأْتِي بِهَا مِنَ الْمَغْرِبِ. So therefore you bring the sun from the west. Good. So what is he effectively saying? He's saying, okay, if you're so powerful, is that a pager?
Yeah. I didn't realize
Is
it was
that-
on audio.
I didn't realize it
Does it vibrate?
existed.
Like people still have pagers.
Wow.
Both my brother and sister are quiet. They knew pages existed.
Didn't have pagers.
Empty last time.
You know what I used to do? I used to like page a teacher with another teacher's phone number.
I don't understand how pages work. Like,
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't understand.
So
probably
so
not
so
right.
that's just like before your time, you're saying, right? So that means before your time we had these things. They were like as big as a dishwasher. we call them
No, I
televisions.
understand what they do, but I don't know, like, what do you, like, send on them?
Oh, number.
Oh, you sing gins.
Oh.
Yeah.
Any
I know,
number,
it's hilarious.
Any number
You just
code.
text
You
it.
put a number code for like what the emergency is. It's really
Yeah.
messed up.
Form of communication.
It's like a very ancient form of texting.
Yeah.
You can only put in
Really?
your phone number.
Yeah.
Another
Yeah.
There was one way you couldn't respond.
You ever seen a
Oh,
television?
really?
So the pager had its own phone number?
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Wow, that was pretty insightful. Well, this generation is smart.
Yeah. CPSA.
But it, I know that has to explain it.
So we had these things called televisions too,
Mhm.
and you had to
Television
walk up
sets.
to it.
You
had
have
the
to walk
television
up
sets.
to it and turn a dial.
It's like
Channel.
it was louder
Wait,
than
that was
shooting
way
a
before
bullet.
your time, right?
Oh, that was like after my time. Yeah. Yeah.
You were the only people on the block who had a color TV.
I wonder if we were. I do remember having black and white TV in our first
We had a
color
black and white
TV.
TV in our kitchen.
Uh-huh.
Didn't Assembly have like a old TV?
I don't know.
CBSA, you guys probably had black and white TVs.
Mm-hmm.
We probably had
Yeah,
we had those ones that you crank, those projectors that go up in flames.
We had this neighbor who like had stuff from like the 20s, and she had those like
2020s.
no, she had those little like
She had like
Slide
3D.
wires. Oh my
Slides.
god.
Really?
Yeah, like
Yeah,
a slide
she had-
cassette.
Was
yeah,
she
it's like in
the
a
old-
circle,
Like that, and you press it,
and
it goes
and then you
around.
look through this thing.
Is that no?
Nancy, those were like those toys that you press
Oh,
on.
those
No, but
Viewmaster viewers?
Yeah,
Yeah.
she had that. But that was
Those
like
are not
all
from
of.
the 1920s.
I know.
What?
Those are from the 1980s. Yeah.
20s? I think it was 70s.
She was just old. in
No,
our head.
her pic. I think
So
Nancy
she's
meant to say
basically
her
my age.
pictures were from.
No, she's like she was
She had
very, she
pictures.
was like she passed she's like was in her 90s. She was our
Okay.
next door like
Alright.
really nice lady, but I thought those were definitely from the like
20s?
70s or 60s.
Or the 20s.
I mean I
I
don't
wasn't
know.
even born then.
We had these things that we also called telephones, and you would like draw circles on them.
I did that.
Wait, you
Yeah.
had a rotary phone?
You have still have one?
You guys did
I
not
want
have
to find a
phones.
rotary phone and put it on the wall. Make it just
Oh.
They used to have retro cell phones.
They do.
It's just as big as a.
It has an actual rotor on it.
In any case,
You know,
so the how do we even? Oh, because
I
the pager.
have no idea.
Okay.
By the time we got
Sling it on the paper.
He planned that. So he
He went to the payphone and called him.
So what's the argument that Ibrahim alayhi salam is giving to the king? He's saying, all right. So Allah brings the sun up from the east. You bring the sun up from the west. Because then it says.
He says rhetorical. Do you bring
So-
right?
We like just offender or something.
No, she has
didn't
to-
know anyways.
She didn't know we weren't starting on time.
Oh. So then it says basically, you know, he outwitted, so to speak, the kafir. So what is the argument? The argument in both of these ayahs, the previous and this one, includes the political. So Ibrahim alayhi salam is essentially saying, why should I believe you? You're claiming to be God, but you can't even move the sun. So it's not so much, okay, can you make the sun come up from the west? Obviously, you can't do that, right? But Ibrahim alayhi salam is saying, I have no need to follow your orders. I don't care how powerful you think you are. That's essentially his argument.
So you're saying political power does not give like authority in terms
Well,
of
I mean, basically, so Nimrod, who's the king of the whole world, is claiming to be God, right? Which is effectively saying, you have to listen to me, right? And Ibrahim is saying, well, okay, my God gives life to the dead, you do it. He says, yeah, I can do that too. He says, well, my God can lift up the sun, from one direction, you make it go the other direction. You change anything in the dynamic of the world, then at least you have something to talk about. Otherwise, you can't really do anything without God's permission. So he's attacking the authority of the king.
is it like a rebuttal to like might makes right?
Saying
Would
you-
that be effectively? I mean, would that be,
Meaning, if you are so powerful, if you really think you're so powerful, then change something in the galaxy, right? And if you otherwise, if you're not, then I have no need to listen to you. No matter
or
what
even
you do.
saying like you're powerful, but it's really this big.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what he's saying.
I
Perspective.
think it's interesting too that like Ibrahim alayhi salam, like had this is like he failed in his first attempt to talk to this man, He was like, oh no, I got it, like look at what I can do. So I think it's like just really powerful in terms of like getting someone to believe and to understand like what the level of their power is in reality, because this man, decided like, oh look, I do have something equivalent, and in his mind he was justifying his own power. But like I think Ibrahim alayhi salam had to, like Allah had to inspire him a second time to say, okay, this is how you approach him. Like, I think that's also really interesting that like the extent to which people can like believe their own like falsehoods, So like, I don't know. That's interesting.
So So a little bit more about, is there more about Nimrod? I mean, he's not named here, right?
So those idols, you know, that when Ibrahim alayhi salam was young, and then there's a whole deal with the idols, and he smashes the idols. The biggest idol is said to be the idol of Nimrod. Okay.
Wait, is that the name of the king?
Yeah.
So was that like his nemesis in his time, like Moses and Pharaoh? Is it?
It's akin to something like that, yeah.
And is it because of like this kind of story that like everyone says, "Oh, you're such a Nimrod"? Like, is it? I mean, like,
Is it right to this specific
That's-
story? Maybe.
because like I mean,
Yeah,
he
that's
must be known as someone like who did something stupid. And,
Isn't it like Namrud or something?
I'm in Arabic, yeah. Nimrod.
I
I
mean,
mean,
use
that would
that.
be our official mockery term. Such a Nimrod.
Do you mean I'm a
You know, I'm not able to bring the sun up from the west. Yeah.
true?
Yeah. So the point is that at one level this is a debate just about the greatness of God, but the underlying point here, especially connected with the previous ayah, is that ultimately at some level there is a fight between good and evil.
Wait, I missed that point.
So connect this with the previous ayah, even the previous two ayahs. There is ultimately a fight between good and evil. At the earthly level, like today, everything is so complicated you can't figure out who's good, who's right, who's wrong. Right? Everything is so complicated. But the higher you go up the food chain, it does become a force, a fight between good and evil.
What does that? What do you mean?
Okay, so right now, take some place in the Middle East at this moment. Okay. So you have ISIS, and then you have the people of ISIS is fighting. Okay. It's hard to argue that either of them, whoever ISIS is fighting, or ISIS itself is legit. Okay. And then you got the people who are supplying the guns to ISIS, or supplying the guns to both sides, right? The war profiteers. And then you have the people for whom it is a financial benefit for ISIS to do what it's doing, right? Or the people who are concerned about the price of oil, the people who might benefit from the rise of the oil prices going up because of ISIS's presence in those regions in Iraq, so forth and so on. I'm saying, see, I'm going like higher up and up
It's
and
not
up.
as black and white as.
I'm saying when you get really high, then it becomes much more black and white. But all the levels that we're at, it's all super complicated.
Wait, what do you mean the highest? So what would be an example of the highest level today?
So, I don't know if there's anything higher than essentially American interests or the banks, right, and bank involvement with the process of nations. Either in terms of
Where would the good and evil be then? And how would you say that this is good and this is evil?
it's more like the forces of exploitation versus the forces who are being exploited, or the people who are being
I
exploited.
see what you're saying.
The argument that Ibrahim alayhi salam used against the Pharaoh to basically have him recognize that he's become feudal, that same argument was made when also challenged, folk like the kuffar and say, can you produce something
Yeah.
else? Can you make the sun rise? So
Exactly.
the same sort of argument that Ibrahim alayhi salam used, same argument that was used by Allah to have people believe,
So the basic point is come up with something better. So, or what do you think? Does it make sense?
I still don't completely understand what you're trying to say.
So the biggest insult Ibrahim alayhi salam can give to the king of the world is say, the biggest insult, the most offensive thing he could say is, you have no power over me.
Okay.
Right? That's effectively what he's saying here.
Okay.
That not only do you have no power over me, I'm surrounding someone else. So there's a moment when Pontius Pilate is talking to Jesus. And he says to him, before Jesus is about to go get crucified, he said, okay, I did everything I can to help you, or everything in my power to help you. And Jesus says to him, you have no power over me, right? Except what God allows you.
So this would tie to the previous verses because
But first you see what we're saying on its own in terms of the
I
sign.
kind of get it, yeah. tying to the previous verses, because when it says La ikrah fi din, it's like giving an example where Nimrod essentially had, even though he had total dominion of the world, he had no power to exert that over someone who gave that power to that
Yeah.
submission to Allah. So this
So
is like a
effectively what we're
perfect
saying-
example in a way.
He controls every inch of the world, but he has no control over human heart.
Okay.
And so at the end of the day, even think of today's environment, where your whole being is bombarded, right? Images, ideas, marketing, advertising, the whole nine yards, right? Every bit about you is bombarded. But still, even today, nobody can control your heart except for what you yield.
What you yield.
And that's what he's saying today.
And everyone has that power.
Yeah. And so,
So from that perspective, when La ikrah fi din can then just be a statement of fact, not like a command to say you can't compel. It's
Yeah.
just saying that
yeah.
it's a state of the heart. It's not a state of ritualistic acts.
So at one level, you can't make someone become Muslim, right? But at the spiritual point, yeah, you can't control anybody's heart. Okay. So this brings us to 259, again speaking about giving life and giving death. أو كالذي مر على قرية وهي خاوية. Okay, so consider the guy who is passing by this town, which has become a ghost town. So this is a prophet who is saying this. The prophet, out of adab for the prophet, is not identified. He is saying, how will Allah bring life to this? Okay, now, when a prophet or someone of super high spirituality is saying, how would Allah let this happen? Can this happen? Think of two other examples, Maryam alayhi salam and Zakaria alayhi salam. So Zakaria sees Maryam alayhi salam. She has food, even though she's in the middle of the temple. Where'd you get it from? God gave it to me. So Zakaria, he goes and prays to Allah for a son. Okay. Zakaria is a prophet. He's praying for a son, and then he gets an answer, yes, you're going to have a son. Okay. And then he says, how's that going to happen? Okay. Right? He's the one who prayed for it, and he's a prophet. And what he's effectively saying is, okay, and what I understand of the sunnah of Allah, meaning how Allah does things, I don't understand how this will happen. Right? I'm really old, my wife is barren. And so what is he told? This is easy for Allah. All he needs to do is say, be it is. Same exact thing happens with Maryam alayhi salam. She's in the temple. This man comes to her and she says, if you're an honorable man, keep your distance. And he says, I'm an angel coming from Allah with the message that you will be having a son named Isa. And then she says the same thing. How can I have a son? Okay, no man has touched me. So what is she saying? She's already at that level. She's a level of iman where she's receiving food. And so what she's saying in terms of the way that Allah does things, I don't see how this, explain to me how this is going to happen. So it's not so much doubt, she's saying, hey, how? You know. So here, you have a prophet who sees a town that has fallen into complete decay, and then he is saying, how will Allah bring life after his death? So it's not so much that he's saying, I can't believe that it could happen. And I know Allah can do anything, but how will it happen? So what happens? Allah makes him die. And then he wakes up. And so then Allah asks him, or actually in fact, Allah asks him, okay, how long have you been asleep? So he says about a day. His food is all preserved. Good. But then he sees his donkey, and his donkey's become a bunch of bones. Yeah. So he's told to look at the donkey, and right before his eyes, the donkey gets remade completely. And so, he says Allah has power over all things. Ala kulli shay'in qadir. Look like you're processing something.
I was just, another example that I was just thinking of was Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he asks how to bring the story of the bird that was...
Perfect segue to the very next ayah.
Is that what it is? Never mind, here it is. Here it is, never mind.
Okay, wait.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Do Christians believe in that?
They don't eat.
Do they believe in the whole, like, you know how Zakaria Islam, like you were saying, they still had a kid when he was old and his wife was barren?
That's
Do
a
they
good
have
question.
that story in their
I don't know.
tradition?
I have to look it up. I don't recall reading very much of anything about, so that's John the Baptist is his son. I don't recall reading much of anything about his story before just Isa alayhi salam finding him. I'd have to find it. I mean, even the story of Maryam alayhi salam is there's very little of it in the Bible. Except that she's the mother of Jesus.
Who's the prophet where he has to pray for all these years for everything, and he loses his land, he loses his health?
Is that Ayub?
Ayub. Okay.
The story of Ayub in the Bible is, in terms of the lesson of that story, is very much like the story of Yusuf in the Quran. So the story of Ayub in the Bible and the story of Ayub in the Quran is very, very similar because his faith is being tested. But the actual full articulation is more easy to compare Yusuf alayhi salam with Ayub. There's also an Enlightenment philosopher, his name is Thomas Carlyle, I think, who says that Islam is basically the story of Job, and which is what, that you're going to be tested through life. So he's saying that to the Christians of Europe.
So this verse 259, besides Allah making an example or teaching this prophet, unnamed prophet, this sort of lesson, like how would that tie? I'm not getting how it ties to the thread here.
So the threat at this exact moment is giving life to the dead. I mean, the threat is essentially the power of Allah. But the previous, Ibrahim says, bring life to the dead. Here, bring life to the dead. The next one is, Ibrahim says to Allah, how do you bring life to the dead? So, bring us to Ibrahim alayhi salam. Again, this is Ibrahim alayhi salam, who is talking directly to Allah. Okay. And he is saying to Allah, can you show me how you give life to the dead? Okay. So again, imagine the level of Iman he's at where he's talking to Allah. And so we've talked about this ayah quite a few times. So
the bird example? Or
bird.
Goulash and they all come together.
Yeah, goulash is a good word. Yeah.
Goulash. So,
It's actually interesting because 258 he says he's already affirmed the idea that Allah gives life and death. So he does not need, he already is convinced of it. He does not need proof of it, yet he asks Allah to show him how he does it.
Yeah,
how he wants to know the how.
Yeah, he's convinced that he can do it. It's just more of an interest, like how are you doing this?
It's I think it's very fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I get that question and describe
How does Allah give life to the dead?
Basically, in describing to non-Muslim groups that the Day of Judgment will be resurrected in physical form, full physical form. Question is, then someone asks, usually some science nerdy-looking guy, to say, well, how exactly?
Who in this room would that look most like? You know, would it look like me or Ahmed or? Oh, right here. See how subtle it was set up, and then boom!
We set that up yesterday, actually. We've been waiting for this verse. But to ask that question, well, how exactly will that happen? So then I go to this verse, I guess. But is that an appropriate verse to use to say that even the prophets pondered that question?
I think it's fine. What often happens, what still kind of confuses me, that if you look at how people understand Allah in all these other traditions, so move beyond just the issue of monotheism and polytheism, it's still remarkable to me how Allah is essentially weak in all these other traditions. Right? Okay, he had to sacrifice his son to forgive people. Okay, that from our perspective doesn't even make any sense. Yeah. And so our notions, our comprehension of Allah is that Allah is far more supreme than their comprehensions of the Supreme Being.
In terms of just Ibrahim alayhi salam in his story, I think he establishes the archetype of our state as human being.
Okay.
Ibrahim alayhi salam didn't have someone saying, oh, this is Islam. He didn't have revelation to guide him to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He thought about it, that's how he came upon like the truth and how Allah inspired him to the truth. And so I think this is kind of like part of that same story of like, even for us as human beings now, like alhamdulillah, we have the Quran and like that guides us to the truth, but like at the same time, like in the way we are in the world with like so many people like that don't believe in anything, I think like this is important in terms of like us understanding, like this is a human being, like Ibrahim alayhi salam is a prophet, but he's like a human being understanding God. So I think that's like a very, I think that is like the core of Ibrahim alayhi salam's story, is like this is the archetype of a human being understanding God in a context where that's not, you know, that's not the norm. And I think that's part of what
That's very accurate.
yeah, like I think
It's really cool because, in other words, he comes up with, this is the way God should be out of, nobody taught him
yeah.
this is the way God should be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He thinks about it like, the sun, nah, this makes no sense. The
Yeah.
moon, nah, this makes no sense. And then he kind of just goes through, and he kind of, by deduction comes up at, you know,
Yeah.
God
like,
is far superior to all of these things.
yeah, and then like I think like these ayats about like, you know, like he's just like, oh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like how do you do this? Like, you know, and I think in this it just, there's like a curiosity that Allah puts in us about him, and like, I think that is kind of being explained in these ayats, like, you know, like Allah is telling us about himself, you know.
Kind of like the natural disposition towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that should be
Right.
in everyone.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I just had this.
is it a science question?
Excuse me, I have a science question.
Excuse me.
You have a little list.
No,
Let me take it out my protective pocket.
I have the last one.
I'm
Never gonna ask a question again.
Guys, these are hipster glasses that are not even a prescription.
they are prescription guys.
They are.
They are. Now I have to make like the
Okay.
best question.
They're
Blow your mind, Jay.
We're all
ready.
We're gonna feel wind.
Okay. So, I mean, I remember within the Jewish tradition that many people didn't even know the name of God. Is that something that was actually accurate, or is that something that was more of like a management type thing, that they just didn't want everyone to know the name of God? They wanted to keep it as a power thing.
Depends on who you ask. So, difference between, yeah, mashallah.
I didn't know
Just
that.
take it
That's
in.
interesting. I didn't know
Take
that.
it
Are
in,
you talking
guys.
about like that not saying the name in
Yeah.
the Jewish tradition versus not knowing the name?
No, as in not knowing. They didn't want. There's something I believe in the Christian tradition. It's not taking the Lord's name in vain, but within the Jewish tradition, it was that they didn't even know what his name was. They would
So-
just say, you know, the Lord of, you know.
So there's two levels of this. One is that only a few select people have the authority to say the sacred name, but then there's something even deeper than that, like at the mystical level, the Kabbalah level, which is basically that no one except the elect of the elect can even know what is the true name of Allah in their tradition, right? So in terms of the masses, they're not supposed to say the name of God, right? So they say Hashem, which is essentially al-ism, right? The name. Right, and but otherwise they will refer to that sacred name just by the abbreviation, like the name of the abbreviation, the Tetragrammaton. And so we're saying, in terms of just the legal level, the critical side will say, yeah, it's a tool of power. Right. That is, in terms of Islamic scholarly circles, a criticism of the priest class and the rabbi class. That one of the blessings of our tradition is that you can literally be functionally illiterate, and still be still have advanced, deep understanding of the whole tradition, right? The simple fact that we have such a high level of illiteracy throughout the Ummah, and we have so many people who have the whole Quran memorized, right? That ours is technically not exclusively a written tradition; it's a very oral tradition, right? And so that was a criticism from within our scholars against the priest class in Christianity, that they control salvation, and then the rabbi class that they control the law, because he had to be literate to appreciate and process the law. And we're saying in our tradition, no, you don't. Yeah. So it is, the critical side is that it is looked at as a tool of power. I mean, one of the blessings and most difficult aspects of our tradition right now is that we have no central authority. So the Catholics have basically taken the lead in the world with the current Pope. I mean, he's saying all like the perfect things everybody wants to hear about social justice and all that stuff, in contrast to his predecessor. Sorry.
I said Bichara, his predecessor.
Yeah.
Poor guy.
And then, I mean, if you really look at it, okay, so like, you know, their problem is the pedophilia, and he's even speaking out against that. The Jews' problem is Israel. You know, our problem is terrorism and all that stuff in terms of like the big hype and press. And so the Catholics are basically just taking the lead. But what happens if you have a different pope? Then all this stuff gets washed away.
Including the bad. That's just what happens. It's like Benedict never existed.
Mm-hmm. So there's always a power element in all these things. When you remove the central authority, then you remove a lot of that power. The harder part is now to figure out how to get people to talk to each other and work with each other. That's very, very difficult. Okay. So the metaphor of bringing life continues with one of the 2 or 3 most popular fundraising ayahs. The example of those who spend their wealth in the way of the law is like a seed which grows 7 spikes, and each of those spikes grows 100 grains. Allah multiplies his reward for whom he wills. So what are we being taught? The equivalent in our ability for bringing life to the dead is what? Charity. And so from here, for the next 10 or so ayahs, we're going to have a contrast between charity and riba. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah. So the first point here, what is leading into this conversation about bringing life to the dead? And we're saying this is the effect of charity, that charity brings life. And look at the ratio. So from a fiqh perspective, the ratio is that for each amount that you donate, what do you get in return? Do the math.
10 times more.
7
Here.
on.
Here it's 700.
And even there, it doesn't stop, right? Because
And that just keeps going.
because each corn, each grain in of itself can lead to more of the same.
More and more and more. Right. So this is now getting into some super abstract philosophical foundations of an Islamic economics. So previously we just talked about power, now we're talking about economics. That the foundation is one of giving, altruism. Altruism may not be the best word. Just because I don't know if there's really any such thing as true altruism. You know what I mean? Like, is there such thing as a purely selfless act? What do you think?
No.
I think the closest thing would be something that a parent would do for a child. But even then, we might even argue there might be some selfishness in there.
But like you do it to feel good.
Sorry?
Like no matter how selfless your act is, you're like, man, I'm so selfless. That's awesome. Like,
I don't recall ever saying that in the mirror, but you know, maybe you do. But the basic point being, the closest thing I can think of is the thing that a parent does for a child, especially in those moments where theoretically there's no apparent benefit.
But
Right?
isn't it for your own happiness too, just to see your kid happy?
Such are the words of someone who has no children.
I'm
Parents,
not
what do you
gonna
think?
argue, like, yeah, that's probably right.
Parents, what do you think? Are there some elements of parenting that are truly 100% selfless?
100% self.
Or is there selfishness in everything? I'm saying essentially I can't think of anything outside of parenting where we'd find selflessness.
I mean, can you like, give me an example or something? Like,
Well, I think, I mean, at some level, if you want to attribute, I mean, again, most people tend to see themselves in their, you know, in their children, and in other words, they see their children as a reflection upon them.
Okay.
So you want, you know, be it, and maybe that's just instinctual that you want
that's sort of like what you need to your progeny to survive or whatever that. At some level, it's a survival instinct maybe, but at some level, it may just be that you see them. When you're sacrificing for them, you're seeing them doing better than you, as really reflecting back upon yourself.
Okay. Your thoughts? Parental units? What do you think? Sulman, what do you think?
Haven't done that.
What do you think?
What's
Newlyweds,
the
head couple.
context again?
Sorry?
Selflessness and parenting. Why
Are
is
you
it?
asking the question? What?
Yeah, what's the context? Of
Oh, so
asking
basically, the question being, I was saying I'm cautious about using the word altruism, but at its most basic level, we would say fundamental. So fundamental. Hey man, fundamental to Islamic economics is giving. Okay. And so I was using the word altruism, but altruism, I don't know if there is any such thing as true altruism, like true selflessness. But I'm saying if there is one, maybe we'd find it in parenting.
Why are you saying
I'd say
no?
I don't know of anywhere else that we could find. Having reflected on this, because there's even so among like the discourses about selflessness. Another example that's given is, suppose you're a soldier and someone throws a grenade in your camp. This is a common example, and so you instinctively jump so that other people in your troop don't get killed. And so I gave that as an example. And a student of mine who's a soldier says, "No, we get trained for that too."
There's a measure of honor entailed within that, and like a quest for honor,
Okay.
in soldiering. But like
I'll
even
be
with
remembered as the guy who. I'll be remembered as the guy who saved all the other guys.
legacy, my legacy was my legacy, right?
So
Even in parenting, though, I would say there's a measure of self-fulfillment. Even with what we would say is altruistic, and doing something which on the surface would seem altruistic, there's a measure of self-fulfillment. I don't know if that is that. What's the?
So what I'm saying is, you're doing something with nothing in return.
But then, why do you do anything then?
Well,
you know what I'm saying? It's like
that's the question.
That's his point, I guess. That there is no such thing as true.
Well, from that point of view,
selfless.
Altruism is it's a label that doesn't fit to anything because it can't exist. Because and that's not to say that you do everything for some sort of measure of selfishness. I'm saying that altruism is describing something which really doesn't exist. It's like a theory, an abstract idea.
So essentially you're saying that there's no aspect of life, even in parenting, that is truly selfless.
Yeah.
For us, parents?
You're saying it's not because you'll always feel good about doing good?
I'm saying
You're saying
even if
though
it gives
you're
you, if it makes you feel good a little bit,
Yeah,
it's still there's a benefit.
Yeah.
But I
So
think
whatever
that, I think
response
that,
you
it
have.
does make you feel good, but you, as a parent, you don't do it to make yourself feel better. You won't tend to your sick child because it makes you feel better. You tend to your sick child because your child's sick and you want them to feel better.
So
you feel better because they're like, okay, I'm not a bad parent. I don't ignore my children.
Okay.
But
you feel better.
but
so you're saying you're not doing it to feel better.
You're not doing it to as a parent. You're
that's
not
just
doing
a side
that.
effect. That's
It's
not
a side. Yeah,
that's
it's
not
like
the goal.
That's like an added benefit, right? But it's not something that you're looking for.
But I guess, in other words, that aside, in other words, because that's always the thing that's, atheists and the theists will have a discussion about, well, there's always some, ulterior motive to your goal, even when you say that it's not for God. But at the same time, is there something, an atheist parent who takes care of their child, there is something that they're doing that they're not necessarily doing it for God or to show anybody else that they're superior to anybody else or anything like that. So there are some, but probably, I guess, there are altruistic instincts within us. In other words, things that are there, that are part of our nature that I think Islam directs us to harness. But they're part of our instinct, I think. There are things that you do that are just instinct, that are like you said, I mean, I'm not trained to fall on a grade, but if you're in a room of people, you may, somebody may just do that just because that's their instinct. And at their time, they may not even be thinking, oh, look what everybody's going to think about me when I die. They just, it's there. You gotta, you.
So you're saying that would be selfless? The question would even imply that it's just instinct.
It's just instinct. But I think Islam might direct us to harness that instinct. Because you have an instinct towards altruism, but Islam wants to cultivate that instinct in you and take you away from that instinct of hoarding, which is also a natural instinct in you to want to keep things to yourself, to hoard things to yourself, to not give to others. So it's trying to nurture that instinct in you, which is altruistic, and take away from you that instinct, which is, selfish.
There's that one example of I don't know if it's a hadith or whatever. There's this guy who had committed all of these sins, or it was a woman actually who was committed all these sins, and then she gave some milk or something to an animal, and then she was granted paradise. She had no reason to do that, right? I don't know if that jogs your memory at all, right? So that's an example, I guess, if it's truly altruistic, like there's no benefit that she has from getting that she got from that, altruism. It's an example of altruism.
I think, but I think the word altruism, the way I understand it, is you don't feel any internal benefit too, and I don't think, in my understanding of that, that's there's no space for that in the deen. In the deen, I think it's there's a transaction, and that transaction is there. It's for the sake of a relationship, whether that be your relationship with Allah, whether it be your relationship with one of His creations, whether it be your relationship, with your child, whatever it is. There's always a relationship that's benefiting from, quote unquote, an altruistic act. So, I feel the altruism, it's if there's no benefit, then, that's not, there's no reason to do it. If there's no internal or external benefit to you, then, you wouldn't do it. I think everything is, it has to be based on some type of relationship. Even if it's, a atheist person, they're doing it based on, this is a relationship that I'm nurturing, So, I think, even, giving charity, you're building a relationship with Allah, you're building a relationship with His creation, there's nothing, I don't know. So, in that sense, I just think the term altruism, I never got it. Why? Because, it doesn't make sense to do something, there's so many things you can do that are, really, really great and, selfless, and that they're, they may be gross, or they may be, something that you don't want to do, but you do it because you know that the benefit of, building that relationship with your siblings, your children, your whoever, is there's a huge benefit in that versus,
So, thus, if there is or is not something that's truly selfless, we are saying that, all right, there is good selfishness. Okay? So if I'm doing something because I want reward from Allah, that's a good selfishness, right? The only reason I'm doing this is because I want reward from Allah. That's selfish. It's purely selfish, but it's a good selfish. So what is also the point that I'm addressing here? Something that I think we've talked about before, but very often we get very, very idealistic in terms of what should be appropriate behavior when we get to the word should. And the bar that Islam requires is much, much lower. Yes, ma'am?
I have a question. Do you, in terms of being rewarded for an action, say if you wanted to give charity or something, your only thought is I'm doing this, I'm just doing this to get a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, get good deeds. Or whereas if you're thinking, this is a good act, I want to do it, I'll benefit the community, and I'll get good deeds, is that better, or?
Well, I'll put it like this. I'd say the best act is you're doing it because you want to see the face of Allah. Right? The best act is you're doing it out of love for Allah.
Yeah.
Everything else is still good.
But are you rewarded more for thinking about the community? And thinking...
I don't know. But again, it's one of those things that it's still good.